Welcome to the Adventitious Adventures podcast. The story I'm going to be jumping into today is based on the real-life D&D campaign my friends and I played. If this is the first time you're tuning in, feel free to learn more about the setting in the past episodes. And if you'd like to learn more, or rather read at your own pace, the original story can be found at our blog of the same name at wordpress.com. You may notice the first few episodes are shorter in length and not as detailed. A lot of our early episodes were not recorded as thoroughly and had to be recreated when putting the blog together. But don't worry, the story will get more immersive and immense and intricate as it is told. With that, let us join our intrepid party as they come together on a mission that will change their lives and the world around them forever. Our tale begins in a small town in the south, named Wolfwater, near the Barrens. Our adventurers, the Aircockra Bill, the barbarian Bruno, the half-elf monk Inara, and the tiefling warlock Malvis, already have met and formed a group. They decided to celebrate and were spending their night drinking in a tavern, when they were approached by an older lady, who seemed very out of sorts, and asked them to retrieve her cat from the neighbors, who had stolen him. This lady was obviously very strange and a little bit crazy, because most of the other patrons in the bar seemed to shy away from her and not really talk to her. But she was very, very insistent that her neighbor had stolen her cat. The party decided that they, needed to talk it over, and after some deliberation and figuring that they were due for some good deeds to be done, the group decided to help the lady and make their way over to where the lady had claimed the cat had been taken. It ended up being not her house, but a house near it. After some investigation along the properties, the only thing that they saw was a fairly unkempt house that apparently included a cellar. Wasn't sure if this was the neighbor's house or, somebody else's, given the location of where this lady said, but this is what they saw. The majority of the group decided that it was fine, they had to find the cat, so they might as well break into the house and check the cellar for the cat. However, Inara didn't feel comfortable with that and chose to stay outside to keep watch. Malvis, for some reason or another, decided to stay with her. Not long after the other two had entered the house and went downstairs, two very large and imposing men snuck their way into the house, catching the, eye of those waiting outside. Discovering that someone had entered, these men went on alert and followed the tracks through the, dust and grime of the house down to the cellar. Seeing this and being obviously worried for their companions, Inara and Malvis decided to, forego their original hesitation and enter the house as well. This surprised one of the men who was still on the stairs, and they quickly subdued him before proceeding to go and help their companions further downstairs. Meanwhile, downstairs, Bill and Bruno had quickly made work of the other man who had entered, having been surprised by his appearance, but making quick work of everything. And upon entering the cellar, they discovered that there was no cat. However, there was a young woman. She identified herself as Alexis, the Princess of the North, and told them that she had been kidnapped and taken here by men from the south. However, after looking over the unconscious men that they had, dispatched earlier, it was quickly discovered that these men were not Southerners. They were actually Northerners in disguise. The princess asked the group to help her return to her father in the north, which they agreed to do. Putting the two men in the cellar and locking it up, after stealing copious amounts of the wine included, they made their way out of the house. However, they quickly realized that it was the middle of the night, and they very obviously could not safely make their way up to the north through the barrens, with it being dark and not knowing exactly where they were headed. So the group decided to make their way back to the local inn, where they had been before. On their way there, however, Inara had this, rush of a conscience, shall we say, and decided to tell the local guards about the men who had been keeping the princess captive. She told them, that they had been part of a kidnapping scheme and that they were unconscious, waiting for them inside the house. And then they continued. Finally, reaching the inn, they booked rooms and went to sleep for the night in different rooms. However, the next morning, they were rudely awakened by guards knocking on their doors and making lots of noise and yelling for people that they were looking for. The party didn't know exactly what to do, and so they kind of kept quiet until the guards busted into the room and a fight broke out. Bill, however, being the noble, come from a rich family Aarakocra that he was, had decided that he was going to stay in a much classier room than the rest of the party, therefore missed the entire fight that then broke out, and not being able to help anybody. And Malvis also was seemingly nowhere to be found. He had earlier in the night been speaking, apparently, to his patron and had disappeared. The only thing that they could find of him was this strange perfume bottle thing that was sitting on the table. Otherwise, he was completely gone. They took out the guards, everything settled down, and they realized that they, were still being found. They could hear shots outside, and obviously they were still being looked for some reason or another. So after assembling Bill and finding Malvis, who has suddenly appeared again, they implored help from the innkeeper. They agreed, and they hid them in a concealed cellar, and they sent the rest of the guards on a hunt away from the inn. After this, the group decided that they had no other, time that they could waste in town. They needed to get where they were going because they're obviously being hunted. Maybe it was because of who they're with, maybe it was because of the actions of Inara, but something had changed and they needed to get out now. So they prepared themselves and they got, rations and figured out what they were going to do and arrived to the gate ready to take on the Barons. What will the road ahead have in store for our ragtag group of heroes? Find out next time, as we head into the uninhabited area known as the Barrens.